Hello, everybody, and hello, Benjamin Fry. I invited Benjamin Fry to come on this podcast because we are good, good friends going back, well, at least 10 years, probably more. Benjamin is the founder of Chiron Clinics, which I always say is the best are the best programs for trauma treatment around the world. Um, there are two residential programs, a day treatment program, um, and again, it is unique. People always ask me, where would you recommend that my client go for residential treatment? And of course, they're expecting a recommendation within the United States. And I have to say, I'm sorry, the only residential program I can recommend wholeheartedly is Chiron House. And now Chiron Clinics, because Chiron House is just one of many inpatient and outpatient projects. Benjamin's also a therapist and has a practice seeing couples. And what else? Oh, and you're a member of the Trauma Research Foundation board along with me. So let's have a conversation. Benjamin, I still remember meeting you so many years ago. Tell us how you came to found the best residential program that at least I've encountered.
Well, I can tell you how I set it up and why. And I remember meeting you too, very clearly, because I don't normally go to Derby for dinner. Uh, for those who are unfamiliar with the UK geography, Derby is about 2 hours north of London. It's a place that is not near anywhere I live. But I was persuaded by a therapist that I trusted very much that the very best person that I should meet in understanding how to provide trauma treatment that I did not yet know was a curiously enigmatic Dr. Janina Fisher. So I was delighted when you accepted my invitation to come and have dinner with. I would have gone anywhere to have dinner with you. It just happened to be a slightly peculiar place in Derby.
Yes.
But so yeah, that was the beginning of an interesting, a wonderful journey with yourself. But what brought me to that place was that in 2008, I started to have what most people would regard as quite a serious breakdown. In common language those days, you might have said, I'm having a breakdown, or I'm super anxious, or even a nervous breakdown. And I knew nothing of the kind of therapies that we do at Khiron Clinics. I knew nothing of you and your work. And I was lost, really. I was lost in the London machine of psychological help, which started for me with therapy. And I looked into all sorts of things. I mean, I went to a faith healer. I had acupuncture. I tried everything everywhere because I was just getting worse and worse. I was getting more and more anxious, more and more non-functional. I stopped working. I had 5 young children at that point. Well, 4, and my ex-wife was pregnant at the time. So there were a lot of pressures, a lot of stresses, and my system was collapsing. I mean, literally just collapsing in a way that made no sense. I mean, life's stressful, things happen. Okay, get up in the morning and deal with it. But I couldn't. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I was, for my sins, a qualified trained therapist at the time. I had a master's in psychotherapy and counseling. I had been on the BBC as one of their presenters on a program where we did some psychological coaching. I had a column in Psychology's magazine. I thought knew what I was doing. I had a practice in Harley Street. And I was powerless in the face of this juggernaut of trauma that hit me. And I didn't know. So, I ended up in a very posh South London psychiatric hospital, which I thought was kind of the nuclear option for these problems. And I always had it up my sleeve. If things get really bad, I can go there and they'll probably sort me out. It was very expensive. I went there, and that's when I started to get really scared, because I realized within a day or two of meeting, their most senior doctor, they had no idea what was wrong with me either. And all that was on offer was CBT and drugs. And there was no kind of connection between the ideas about treatment or the ideas about my problem and, if you like, my own narrative. I mean, in psychotherapy, obviously, we're always very interested in people's narratives, doctors maybe less so, but the fact that I lost my mother at a very young age and all sorts of strange things that happened along the way, and I grew up in boarding schools, et cetera, none of this factored into the treatment I was recommended.
I
And
mean,
it really
what's
worked.
striking, and because it's still a problem, is that nobody said, oh, he has a trauma history.
No, the word trauma was never used. I mean, this was 2010, I think. No, 2009. And I took the antidepressants. They had a very bad reaction with me. I felt slightly better. I stopped taking them. I got worse. And in the end, I've been doing this for about a year. I've been kind of non-functional for a year. I haven't been able to work, barely sleeping. I don't remember laughing ever. It was really bad. And I was living isolated in the country, running out of money. By this time, 5 young children. And I was, I got to a point of really quite terminal despair. And somebody did say to me, I think you have trauma, and there's places in America that treat it. And I looked at the website for the Meadows, which talked about treating trauma, and I thought, well, I really got nothing left to lose. So I went. It was very difficult to get there in my condition. We kind of had to spend all of the money I had remaining. I left behind my wife in a freezing house with 5 young children and just took off to the desert in Arizona, hoping that I'd come back, not really believing that I would. And luckily enough, two good things happened to me there. One was that I got medicated gently for the first time by a psychiatric nurse rather than a psychiatrist. She'd see me every single day and adjust my dose every single day, because I was so anxious that I couldn't deal with anything, and a drug is a thing.
Well,
So
it's
it
not
made me
side
worse.
effects. It has side effects. And then,
Right.
right. And also, I know from my years actually being at Chiron House and being involved with clients, is that the UK health system over medicates.
Of
And
course.
in the US, we less often over medicate.
Right.
It was extraordinary how many people came to Chiron House completely over medicated.
Yeah, and I think that the approach that I'd received was been too much too soon for my system. So, long story short, I was very lucky that I bumped into, by accident, the woman who ran a new project called Melody House, which was named after Pia Melody, that she had started with Peter Levine and Francine Shapiro. And they did EMDR and they did somatic experiencing. And I went there for 4 months, and it basically saved my life. And it was my first experience of what we now think of as kind of modern, neurobiologically informed trauma therapies. I had never heard of any of these things before. And, I thought I was a fairly well-informed Harley Street psychotherapist. So I came back kind of unbroken as a human, but my life was broken. And I had this family that I needed to work to support, and couldn't possibly get a job. I was kind of 40 and unemployable. So the only thing I could think of to do was to set up a clinic copying the one I'd just been in. And so that's what I did. And amazingly, it's still there 15 years later.
Right. It's extraordinary because I remember hearing the story and thinking, this is crazy. This man is going to do himself in. How could he possibly? I mean, I understand the impulse, but but then I met you, and 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 then I was convinced that you actually had a plan. It wasn't just kind of a need that came out of your own healing, that you actually had a plan.
Well, I had the only plan I could come up with in a sense. And when you have few resources, and we started it with, it's unbelievable now to look back, we literally started with no money at all, renting a holiday let week by week. And, that was our premises. And in a way, the kind of simplicity of what was possible was a blessing, because we could only do what we could do. And I religiously copied what had happened in the clinic I'd been in because it worked. And then, I was invited to meet people like yourself and expand the ideas about what we do and why we do it and how we do it. And I started to learn more from more people about more things. And, you taught all of us a great deal. I mean, you say that Khiron is now a program you really believe in. Probably 80% that's because of you coming and teaching us so much that we didn't know before. I mean, amazingly hardworking, talented people have been there, not including me.
Well,
and you've been one of them.
Wait a minute, because you already had, I mean, the reason that I got involved was because, I mean, I hope our audience can appreciate when Benjamin described this little program he had set up on no money, it was like a vision of what I'd always thought an ideal trauma treatment center should be like. So they had yoga, they had mindfulness, they had Tai Chi, they had somatic therapy, and which was extraordinary because of how few people are trained in somatic experiencing and sensory motor psychotherapy, but you managed to find them. And 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 so he was describing this sort of fantasy I'd already had for years about an ideal trauma program. And 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 the wonderful thing is it was working for people. You didn't have room for very many people and very many clients, but they were actually doing well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, it's strange to look back on it because it's a long time ago. And, we have a lot more resources now. We do a lot more. And yet, at its very simplest, it would take people who've been going round and round in circles, often in the UK system, often in the state system, and it would give them kind of like a junction off that circle. They'd start to get onto a path of linear recovery, where they would start to get better. And they didn't necessarily, finish their treatment with us, particularly residentially. They then go into outpatient, either with us or with others. But the feedback we would tend to get, and it could be a few weeks later or months or years later, was that despite the slightly kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back nature of these kind of treatments, nonetheless, when they look back on it, that was the turning point. That was when they began to go from being in the system endlessly to getting out and getting their life back. And that's what happened to me. All I really wanted was, I know it sounds naff, but to kind of pass that on. It's partly because I didn't have a job and I needed something to do, but the thing that I got to do was the thing that I was most passionate about doing, which was making it possible for more people to get access to what I just felt I got purely by luck. I stumbled into my treatment literally by luck, and I could so easily have never had it.
Right. Yes. But that is also true for most of the Khiron House clients, that they have usually tried everything, been on every medication, often been to other hospitals and residential programs. And then they finally get to Chiron House. And well, the first thing that happens when they get there, I think is important. When they first get there, they're triggered because they're right, because they're they're flooded and in a traumatized state, and they come into a new environment, very intimate, because maybe I should describe the setting. So all of you have to imagine your image of a small English manor on beautiful grounds. So a manor house. So, but you drive into Chiron House to this little manor house in a beautiful, beautiful, verdant green setting. And already you start to feel better. Just just the nature alone and the sense of, I don't know, welcome maybe is a good word.
Yeah.
Um, I think is brings a lot of support. Then, then of course the clients have to start meeting new people. They have to share rooms because the manor house is not a spa, it's not a luxury resort. So they have to deal with sort of old plumbing and various other kinds of problems. And often they get very triggered. But that's also an opportunity because that's what trauma is about. There's an opportunity for them to actually start to work on the fact that they've been in a triggered state. And, but I remember having to reassure clients it's normal that you come here and get triggered, right? It's not like you come here and finally the trauma just lifts and you feel safe. It's not that easy.
No, not easy at all. I mean, people who understand about the way our trauma and nervous systems work will know that when you feel safe is when it all starts to come out. And so there's this very delicate balance between giving people a really good container and then helping them to cope with what comes up because of it. And of course, like all of us, we'll do this in our own relationships. If it's starting to feel too difficult because it feels too good, we'll do something to interrupt it being good. So you have this constant symbiosis, which you're so familiar with, of people dropping into therapy, dropping into treatment, beginning to wrestle with the things that are so difficult. And then, kind of working around the edge to think, well, maybe I'll do less treatment this week, or I won't turn up for a session, or I won't go to a group. And it's a hard titration because people are being invited into the kind of crucible of healing that they want so much, but it can be very painful to arrive there.
Well, and difficult when you're very anxious or you have no energy. The other thing that I immediately loved about Chiron House, having worked in US psychiatric hospitals, which in a way are infantilizing because everything's done for you. Your meals come on a tray, somebody makes the bed, and it's certainly not, again, luxurious, and often it's very institutional, but it doesn't expect anything of you. And what struck me, and we're talking now about what would it have been if this is 2025, would it have been 2012 or 14,
Yeah,
something like that.
probably
Yeah.
13, 14, 15. Yeah.
Yeah. That the clients were expected to make their own meals, to do their own shopping, to make their own meals in a big communal kitchen and to eat together. So it forced a kind of normality, a certain level of functioning that I think is wonderful for people. And it also forced them out into the community to go shopping. And 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 what I saw was that the clients, as much as they moaned and groaned about it, um, really got a lot out of cooking together and eating together and cleaning up together. It was remarkable. I'm remembering a stage at which, and I can't remember why, or if it was your idea or somebody else's. Um, Once a week, the clients would make lunch for the staff, and staff and clients would eat lunch together, which
Yeah, I
was
remember that. That was
fun.
Brex's idea. It's kind of like,
Oh,
old school British psychiatrist who's a deep rebel deep down. And I think it comes from these kind of early ideas of therapeutic communities. And who was that British psychiatrist who lived
oh,
in the unit in the East End?
R.D. Lang, yes.
R.D. Lang, yeah. So
Yeah.
there was a little bit of that going on. But I think that, the bigger point is that what I learned in my original treatment in Melody House was that what everyone wanted was kind of one-to-one time with their therapist, which is rare, but very valuable. I mean, the EMDR I did was probably saved my life. But actually, the biggest component of kind of value to my system and the time we spent was in the community. And we would have community group twice a day where we learned to be in relationship with people, even if we didn't like them, which was a totally novel experience for me. I mean, just being in
Trigger.
any kind of honest relationship, I think, was a novel experience for me. And then, in the living arrangements, we were not allowed to not share a room, although nobody wanted to share a room, and we were compelled to go to group. We would bust out to 12-step meetings every day locally, constantly being put into situations where we would relearn how to be in relationship with another human being in a way that was safe, where we kept them safe, where there were lots of rules. It was very kind of artificial, but it meant that I experienced for the first time, I think, truly deeply what it was like to be in connection with another person and not be scared shitless of them.
Right,
And
right.
that's very restorative
Oh,
to a
yeah.
nervous system which is bouncing all over the place while it's trying to recover, particularly if you got deep into kind of the processing part of therapy, which we would do. You need a container, you need a vessel to sit in. And my own self and my own body couldn't contain anything. And the container I had was my roommate, the people I shared my house with, the people that were on the campus with us, and the therapists, and then even the people in the community that we went to 12-step meetings with. It was a revelation, it was an eye-opener. So, as you say, people will come into treatment and they'll say, oh, I don't want to share a room, I don't want to go to group, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. And of course, the people that get the best results, the best outcomes, come from people who do everything, even though they don't want to do it.
Right,
And,
right, absolutely.
they're right there in the middle of dinner, making it, sharing it, eating it, even though they don't want to be.
Right.
And
That's
that's what we did.
right. And that's true. I mean, that's true for all of our clients that, right, inpatient, outpatient, right? Those who show up and are really, who take that plunge if they can. And what I also really appreciate about Chiron House is that you've been able to accommodate um, skillfully treating every type of trauma from DID to PTSD and everything in between. And that, I mean, now I think particularly, and I think this resonates with me because I've always said I am the therapist of last resort.
Oh.
Right? And for so many people, Chiron is the treatment center of last resort.
Yeah, I think that's true. And you did a very helpful thing for us. You taught us your TIST model, which I mean, maybe you want to talk about that a bit, but it really comes into its own in that kind of environment. And to this day, you know, it's kind of the backbone of what keeps everything vaguely safe, where it could be very difficult.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that a bit and how you came up with that and how you kind of, I mean, I felt like you kind of brought that to life through Khiron Clinics in many ways.
Right. I mean, it was wonderful. Again, it goes back to that idea of community. What was wonderful was that those clients who were using TIST, so they were, for those of you on the podcast who haven't heard much about it, TIST is my trauma-informed parts model that integrates somatic techniques and parts techniques. And I remember there was a whole discussion one night in the kitchen, as reported by the clients, about people saying, well, why is my therapist not talking about parts? Why do the rest of you get to talk about parts? So they were almost, and they started using the language together, which of course deepens the treatment because they're thinking parts other than in one 50-minute session at a
Oh.
time. And I also appreciate that the system includes 2 one-on-one sessions with a primary therapist and 1 weekly session with a secondary therapist, because I think so often traumatized clients get so triggered by their therapists that they need the second. In fact, Giovanni Liotti, the late Giovanni Liotti, used to talk about it is often helpful to have the presence of a second therapist to
Oh.
whom the client has a much less complicated relationship.
Yeah, I think I've often had this fantasy of the whole thing being so well funded that anyone could have 2 therapists in any group or any session. It's hard to pull off in reality, but it's a lovely idea to just begin to be able to bed community into everything. And, you know, I always had this idea that the individual sessions are kind of the kernel of the group, and the group is the kernel of the community. And we've played with that. I mean, we have had times where we've been able to put 2 therapists in a session or 2 therapists in a group. And I think it's also, when you think about what's it like to be a therapist and work in a place like this, I mean, it's amazing because the rewards are extraordinary in terms of the transformations you see. You know, so many people come and they say, this has changed my life or even saved my life. And it's really hard to feel anything more satisfying than hearing those words. I mean, particularly for me, because that's kind of why I set it up, almost to give thanks for my own life being saved in treatment. But at the same time, as you can imagine, you know, if anyone in your audience can imagine the experience of working residentially with trauma, the kind of patients that need a residential setting for trauma, it's incredibly hard. So,
Right.
you
24
know,
hours a day, 7 days a week.
right. And as a body of people trying to help those people, you know, the staff, the therapists, everyone, they need each other too. So there's this kind of almost a kind of nested symbiosis of the community of the therapists that support and take care of and look after each other, and how you then bring that to the treatment model and to the clients and the residents. And I think it's all of
Those,
it's very fragile. All of it's very hard to do. And I'm sure you saw that many times, but the dividend of doing it well seems to be something that's really hard to get in a different way.
Right, right. Um, I mean, I think about therapists in private practice, and certainly in many ways that's easier, right? You can adjust your workday. Um, you can even adjust your practice once you get busy. Um, and, you know, none of those, if 4 clients had a crisis on the same day at Chiron, right? The staff has to deal with it. And I can remember days where so and so was running into the meadow and screaming and sobbing, and someone else was running in the other direction, threatening to self-harm, and somehow the staff had to respond. But the support of working in a team is so extraordinary. And I think, it's funny when you use the word symbiosis. Um, at the first, I thought, well, that's a negative because we tend to think, and maybe in the US we do, we think of symbiosis as something negative in the context of psychotherapy. But I think you're actually using it in sort of its original context, which comes out of attachment theory. So I just want to make that clarification to our group because you're not talking about unhealthy symbiosis. You're talking about people who are kind of feeding each other in order to do something very important.
Yeah, I mean, I hope I'm talking about the whole being greater than the sum of the parts, and finding that dynamic for the clients, for the whole community, including the staff, is a sort of magical elixir. And I sometimes wonder if we should do more to talk about what it's like to work with really complex clients, because most therapists work in private practice or in a small practice or in a hospital setting, and they'll have a group of clients, and one or two of them will be you talk about the heart sync clients. I think the clients that are so complex, you don't quite know what to do. And we deal with the most complex clients all the time. And I sometimes feel like we should reach out a bit more and kind of clarify what are the important steps to take with those people. And you teach about this a lot. I mean, you taught us most of what we know about it. What would you say, to people who see someone 1 hour a week when they're at risk, they're worrisome, they're really complex? What have we learned that can help them?
Well, I think one thing that I've learned is that um, naming what they're going through as trauma, and that's often the experience of Chiron House clients is they come and someone starts acknowledging that they're traumatized rather than trying to get them to do better. And not that we aren't trying to help people do better, but that's not the one single goal. So I think the acknowledgement is important. The acknowledgement of triggering in the group dynamic is very, very important because otherwise people start to think this person is really offending me, this person is really disrespecting me, as opposed to this person really triggers me.
One of the things that I think you were very helpful in teaching us was that it's okay to be quite brave in the face of risk. I remember we had people who would self-harm and do all sorts of things. And, the temptation, as you just said, is to try to say something, well, stop doing it. Stop it. Don't be that person. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of taught us to acknowledge that part and almost, to embrace it and say, well, thank you for helping me so far with that strategy, but maybe we could look to go beyond that now. I mean, how would you frame it?
Yes, I think that it's something that I think about and talk about a lot, which is increasing the therapist tolerance for unsafe behavior and
Mm,
making finer distinctions because there's a difference between being on the verge of suicide and cutting yourself or headbanging. And so I think what I helped the program to do was not to react to headbanging or cutting with the same level of risk management that we would use with suicidal clients. And using TIST, we understood those behaviors as driven by parts
mm.
who were trying to protect the client from overwhelming emotions.
Yeah.
And it was very, very hard. I
It's very
remember,
hard, but you kind of helped us manage an idea that was floated at us, which we should manage risk with relationship rather than with things like, locked doors or constraints or whatever. And it's a very alarming idea in a sense for, practicing therapists, either in private practice or in a community setting like that, that risk can be tolerated if relationship is strong.
right. And what's hard for the staff is that if you have a client, I mean, I remember we had a client. I mean, I remember many clients, but I remember a client, and you probably do too, who used to run because Chiron House is an unlocked setting in every respect. So, so she would run from the grounds out to the road, and she would lie down in the road. And then, or she would run to a cemetery nearby, and she would lie on the ground and I can't remember, cry, scream, or just space out. And the staff were getting very burned out from always running after her. And so and also in that kind of community setting, I mean, we're talking about what, 12 clients, I think the main house had as its capacity. When there are 12 clients, it's very obvious to everybody if the staff are spending more time with another client than with you.
Mm,
So, not that I think this this client was doing it for attention seeking. I think it was a young child part that was trying to go home, trying to find relief in its own way. And so finally, we just set a limit. We just said, all right, you can run, you can spend the day in the cemetery if you want. You can't lie down in the road, but you can spend the day in the cemetery. Just be back by 5. And so every day she would run to the cemetery and then she'd be back by 5. And within a couple of weeks, uh, she didn't bother to run anymore, or the
mm,
child part didn't. And so we were, I mean, for me, I was looking for ways to give these, the clients' adult self more what? Kind of more hegemony, like more sovereignty over this system of parts, but not by contracting, not by rules and sanctions, um, because there are very few sanctions that you can impose in a residential program without excluding the resident. And I love another thing you already had set up before I got there was this policy, not not of not of rejecting, discharging clients who broke the rules or self-harmed. You would exclude them. They'd have to go home for a week or a month, and then they could come back. And I thought that was just brilliant because it meant that people were not being punished. They were asked to go home, gather themselves, come back and make another try. And then we started doing parts contracting. So the client would come back after the exclusion, meet with the clinical director and therapist, and they'd be asked to sign a contract agreeing to how did we put it? To manage the part that was causing the difficulty. So whether it was a part who was running off to the pub and having a drink, or whether it was a part that was cutting, or whether that was a part that was um, being really, I don't know what the right word would be, being very threatening to other clients, behaving in a way that threatened other clients, which is a challenge you have in a group setting.
Really hard. Yeah. I remember we sometimes have to face this idea of, can this person stay here? And, we thought through, are they sabotaging their own treatment or are they sabotaging other people's treatment? And it's kind of like that latter distinction that made it important to then, pick up on that. I'm wondering if you have any memories of clients that the positive outcomes really surprised you. People that you thought, I don't know if this is going to work, and then good things happen.
Oh, definitely, without a doubt. And I mean, I'm thinking of someone who was there for a very long time. She might have been there for over a year, which is unusual. And and when she came, she appeared to be someone whom even Chiron House could not help.
Wow.
But she stuck with it, the staff stuck with her. I think she was very endearing, and that's something I've noticed, that if the client is likable or endearing, you know, that'll give us more patience. And so the staff kept working with her. She hung in there to the limited extent that she could and made it. And those are moments that really excite me.
Yeah, amazing.
And then some
So,
clients have real transformations where it really their whole lives revolutionize. And those are wonderful moments too.
I think those moments are extraordinary. I've never experienced anything like that outside of these residential programs, both as a patient myself, and then, as a clinician in the early days, I used to run all the groups. And then I used to kind of run all the admin. And we'd see this. And it, first you think it's a kind of miracle, and then it would happen again, and it would happen again. And as I said at the beginning, it was all pretty simple and humble. Now we have more bells and whistles, certainly more facilities, more modalities. But there's something just so rewarding and encouraging about the idea that at the core of every damaged person, however poorly they present, is this kind of undamaged place that's yearning just to find their way out, find the path. And they keep trying, keep trying, keep trying. And for some of them, thankfully, we are the path. And then amazing things happen. And it's extraordinary to see, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's so it's everything that therapists want out of a career of helping people. And And it's also wonderful to see the sort of triumph of the human spirit. Uh,
Definitely.
I have this quote that I found. It's actually from Goethe that says, "If I treat you as you are, I will make you worse. If I treat you as though you are already what you can become, I will make you better."
Mm, that's
And when we take clients who have not been able to get out of bed for months and they go to yoga class, right? And the beautiful thing is they're not expected to just plunge right in and do a complete yoga class, but they can come and start to move. Um, I think even if initially the client says, "Oh, that was terrible. I want to go back to bed," they've done something that's going to start changing their lives.
Yeah, well, I'm very grateful to you because you did a lot to help us to do things which I do think, even it might sound immodest, but I don't mean it immodestly, but I do think the clinic changes and saves lives based on the feedback. And it is hard to find elsewhere. As you said, it's a particularly kind of curated elixir of programs that, for the person who needs it, it's hard to find elsewhere. Yeah, it's true.
Absolutely. Because from a US point of view, it's not cost effective. But I do want to say, just for the Americans in our podcast audience, that uh, two things: that Chiron pays the airfare for American clients who want to come in, and also that there are many U.S. insurance companies that will work with Chiron House.
Yeah, I mean, the former is easier. We'll pay for anyone to come from anywhere in the world. And I set that up because of my own experience of how hard it was to go to Arizona from London when I was feeling I couldn't get out of bed, let alone go through an airport.
Right.
And there's something about just having a bit of help. I mean, it's not just the money, it's also, someone who, if you need to, will book the flight for you, help you get on and pick them up at the airport. There's just something about being held from home rather than having to launch yourself into space that felt very close to me personally.
Right.
Insurance companies, I have much less power over, sadly. They do all sorts of things, but yeah, it can sometimes work. And I'm always flattered when people come from America because all the techniques we use were invented and promulgated by Americans. And so it is interesting. But I think also you say, it's a difficult thing to do. And I think we're lucky in that we only have, it's not really a business. I mean, yes, it's a business, but it's a business owned by me and only me. It's not owned by some private equity company or something. And I don't care what insurance will pay for. What I care about is what will help people get well. And that when you were there, all we ever asked, the questions people would say, but can we do that? Should we do that? Are we allowed to do that? Will we get sued for doing that? And all I ever said is it going to help them or not? And if it does, do it. And I'll deal with the rest. And somehow we kind of made it through so far. Touch wood.
Right. Absolutely. I think the insurance company part is very meaningful, particularly for America. I mean, initially, there was no possibility of getting a U.S. insurance company to pay the cost. So I'd have to tell people, well, here's the good news. Here's the name of the best trauma residential program I know. And here's the bad news. It's it's in the UK and they don't take insurance. So at least I can now give them better news.
That is good news. And we'll always take insurance. The question is, will insurance take us? And you have to be around for a while and gain some traction and credibility before they'll do that. Because they're always looking for reasons to say no, aren't they?
Right, right, absolutely. But with some of their chronic clients who've been through a million hospital programs at great expense.
Mm.
Just like the National Health Service in the UK, they're willing to spend the money because you're the program of last resort, as well
Yeah,
as some people, the program of first resort. So,
yeah. I
yeah,
think, that hopefully for anyone, however it's funded, it's long term better than not paying for it, because people get their lives back. They go on to be productive. They go on to, in England, we have a state security system, so it's a safety net. If you're in it and you stay in it, you can stay in it for 50 years. It costs the country a fortune. And so, yeah, sometimes the NHS does pay for people to come in. And I'm delighted when that allows them to get back their own sense of agency and get back to being productive. That's
that's
the way
wonderful.
what it's the most satisfying part of all of this, is to just give someone themselves back.
Right. Oh, that's a wonderful way to put it. Yes, absolutely. Well, we're going to have to stop. And thank you, Benjamin. I do want to say you can find Benjamin at the Psychotherapy Networker Conference, the annual Innovations Conference, the Trauma Conference in Boston. Where else? Your Chiron has also been very active in sponsoring. Oh, and the Masters Conference in Oxford. Um,
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's, I met you through a therapist, but many of the people who've helped us with our program, I've met by going to conferences, listening, and kind of thinking, well, what do I wish we had? What do I wish had been there when I was in treatment? And it's an eye opener. And you have to, from where I started, not knowing anything about anything, having the opportunity to go to these global conferences, meet with leaders in the field, and get helped and educated by them, like we've done by you, is just priceless. When you show up, it's a happy day. Staff can't believe their luck that Janina Fisher's in town, and
well,
the others
I,
too. And so, we're just very grateful that this was also your passion, because without your wisdom and leadership and amazing clinical experience and insight, I think people would have had a much harder time, both staff and patients. So thank you for being there.
well, good. That warms my heart. So thank you, Benjamin, for being here and for giving us a chance to talk about this wonderful journey we've been on.
It's been great. Thank you for having me. Lovely to see
Yeah.
you again.